Hello, and welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving, where we're putting human back in human capital solutions. On today's episode, we're going to hear from an industry leader where they're sharing their thoughts, feedback, and perspective on what's happening in today's world of work. Well, let's stay tuned and perk our ears up for another exciting episode.
Welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving. We are so excited, Darren, today for a guest that I have been wanting to have on the podcast since we launched, and I'm so thrilled to have one of my favorite people in the industry that we get to support, an incredible man and an incredible leader that I look forward to our audience getting a chance to hear from. We've got the great Sterling Chung with us today. Sterling is an incredible man, but he's also the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Quality at Aurion Biotech, based Seattle, Boston, who knows, all over the world at this point, really making a difference, making a change. But Sterling's got an incredible career, 20 plus years, leading different clinical and CMC regulatory strategy, product development, regulatory intelligence all over the world, US, Canada, EU, Japan. I mean, I could go on for 20 minutes just introducing him, but he's also an incredible leader, an incredible man, and somebody that I really, really enjoyed the chance to work with. So, Sterling, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Hey, I'd like to thank the Thorough Group and especially you, Sean and Darren, for bringing me on. I really appreciate the time to talk to you guys about, my passion, which is basically regulatory. So anybody willing to listen, I'm willing to talk.
I love it. Love to hear it. Well, hey, let's dive right on in because we got a lot to talk about today, and the audience is here to hear from you, Sterling, not from us. So let's jump on into it. So, what I love is that you have built a remarkable career really at the intersection of regulatory and clinical development. And I'm always curious. I love to hear from people in the background. What drew you to this space? And so I'm going to ask a two-part question. What drew you into regulatory specifically? And then what keeps you energized over the years? You've seen a whole variety of ups and downs and challenges and, great products and products that didn't, fare so well in the clinic and vice versa. So tell us a little bit, what drew you to this space and what's kept you energized over the years?
Yeah, I think just to answer the first part of your question. So, in undergrad, I did actually try to study pre-law and pre-med. And I was I was thinking about doing law, but I had this opportunity to do internship at Abbott. And then from there, they had this professional development program where you got exposure and quality to different aspects of quality. And one of those was in regulatory. And it really drew me because it kind of nicely blended between the political piece or the poli-sci law piece and the biology clinical piece. And ever since then, I've always found, that intersection, like you said, between regulatory and clinical development really interesting. And I have said to people, regulatory is more than just regulatory. I don't know if people actually understand that regulatory is made up of like CMC, non-clinical, clinical, even operations pieces of it. And it gives you a broad exposure to what development actually looks like. And to answer the second part of your question, what's driven me in my career to the place that I am today is really just this desire to understand and to know and to try different things in clinical development, in CMC, in ops, because I think I'd be bored painting the same widget over and over again. Like if you told me I had to paint that widget white over and over again, I would probably do a poor job because I lose interest like fairly quickly. But I think my career has been a reflection of just thoughtfully thinking about what it is I want to do. So what I mean by that is I started in Big Pharma because, Big Pharma has a lot of the structure and the things in place and actually really good at mentorship in terms of understanding what there is in that space for example, in CMC reg or clinical reg. But then the reason why I started going to smaller and smaller biotechs is because once you understand how to do something and have broad exposure and have had opportunities to get drugs developed and approved, you want to do it in an environment where it's fast. Well, at least for me, it's faster, more nimble, um, and really um, just willing to take risks. Where in big pharma, there's a lot of just rehashing ideas, rethinking things, and it does cause things to be slower. And so the last, I think, 8 to 10 years of my career have has been understanding and adjusting to what small biotech's all about. And so if there's one thing to your question on that second part of what really energizes me, it's really the learning aspect, because regulations change all the time, and you go stale if you keep giving the same advice, right? So for myself, it's been tailoring the advice based on the environment that you're in or the drug that you have.
That's great, Sterling. Sean and I really value when we have guests on the podcast that use the word passion. We can completely identify with that, just given how long we've been in the industry and have had the phenomenal opportunity to partner with such a wide variety of really emerging biotech to mid-size to even the larger entities out there that would kind of define themselves as big pharma. You just mentioned how you really started your career in big pharma, but how you've transitioned over the last 5 to 6 years into that emerging to mid-size science-driven biotech centric type of company. But I'm curious, Sterling, having started at Big Pharma, transitioning to that smaller to mid-size, how has your approach to really regulatory strategies and decision making changed from going from Big Pharma to smaller biotech? You touched upon a little bit of that, but if you could take a deep dive, I know our audience would really appreciate that.
Yeah, great question, Darren. I think this is a hard transition, and what I mean by that is there's a lot of folks who start their careers in big pharma and or even started in small pharma, right, and or emerging biotechs, and they think that's the only way to do things. And I feel like one of the biggest um, things you really need to think about when you do a transition from either big to small or small to big is what is the purpose of why you're doing that transition, right? Otherwise, just stick in big pharma. It's going to be similar, just maybe a different, name on the and slogan or logo, right? And so I think the biggest thing that I would say to people is like, what is it that you want to get out of transitioning from big to small or small to big? And I can tell you, from my transition from big to small, one of the biggest things that I wanted to get out was I wanted to work in a more nimble environment. And what I mean by that is like most of the organizations that I've joined, it's really a regulatory group of one, right? And so I bring in consultants to help me with the technical expertise that I might be missing, or there's some strategic thing that I don't know. And so, it's kind of like jack of all trades, master of none. And so I would say that if you have done big pharma for a while, it's a great educational learning ground where you go pretty deep into like narrow buckets, right? And you become specialized in these narrow buckets. And what I learned going into small biotech is two really big things. It's like you have to help out where you can help out or pull an experience that is technically outside of your guardrails to help move the company forward. And then I think the second thing is I wanted to basically take concepts and strategies of a company, blend in regulatory concepts, and see how that progresses, right? Where it's really, hey, you either help the company move along or you messed up, right? And so I don't mind taking accountability of actions or thoughts or ideas that I have. And so it's really how quickly can you take that concept, that idea, and translate it into reality. Whereas I feel like in bigger pharma, it has to be vetted. There's a lot of steps to go through, and that idea is probably going to take you about a year to 2 years to execute. In small biotech, I could probably do it the next day. Like, it's like I like call a few people and they're like, okay, hey, we think that idea is good. Like, let's roll with it. Let's see what happens. And I think to me, that's the exciting part of my career right now, which is like these concepts, these ideas, these things that you want to push and say, do we really have to do it that way? And you know, there's a lot more people in big pharma to say, no, I've done it this way. I've done it for 30 years, and this is the way we should continue to do it. And um, whereas in small biotech, it's like maybe two people that say, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea." But there is a part of you that's like, when everybody agrees, and you're just like, "Holy cow, what are we actually doing here? Like this,
Right,
we're
right.
going to execute this idea in like 2 weeks. Like it's pretty
Let's
crazy."
go. Yeah,
Yeah,
let's go. Wow, it's such a difference, and it's so interesting. We work with a lot of small and emerging companies who come to us and they say, "Hey, we want X candidate. We're looking for this type of person. We're looking for this type of, phenotype of candidate." And one of the big things that always comes up is, we either I'm okay with someone from Big Pharma because of X, Y, or Z, and a lot of times that is a leader who has made that transition and they understand how to guide someone else through it, but they can utilize the good experience that they know they're going to get out of a candidate in that space. Or they say, no, I don't want anybody. I want somebody who understands how to be nimble and quick and how they, can wear six hats in a week because they understand how we have to be able to pivot quickly. And it's funny because, we work with a lot of clients who choose to work with us because of a lot of the same things, right? Like they can work with a big global firm that needs six levels of approvals and this tool and this thing and that thing, or they can choose to, and it does not fit for everyone, but they can choose to work with a nimble firm like ours who can make a decision in an hour and turn around and come up with a different solution that more appropriately fits what they're looking for. And so it's interesting when you do see the juxtaposition between the two, because I think a lot of it comes down to, what you've mentioned around leadership, about around the understanding and the ability to drive it and having been there before. And so I love the advice you gave on, making that transition one way or the other. You have to know the why, and you have to be, okay with a little bit of discomfort and a little bit of, things not always going the way that you expect. But speaking of discomfort, my next question is I want to pivot a little bit into what's a, I know there's only one, you could probably write a book on this, but what's one regulatory challenge you faced in your career that taught you a lesson that still you carry with you today? Something that's, not a one-off that you're like, oh, that was a great story, but is there anything foundational that you said, okay, either never again, or hey, now this is going to be a part of my tool belt that I never neglect to use again? Can you maybe walk us through that?
yeah. Great question. And so, Sean, I think I heard you in terms of what's one challenge that has had an impact on my life and really taught me a valuable lesson. But before I go there, I actually want to say, Sean, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about your company is the fact that you guys listen and are patient. Because I would say in small biotech, we change our minds like every other day, and it's hard for as a I know as a partner, because I trust me, I have understood how much I change my mind in a week. But I would say in small biotech, I think one of the biggest, most important things is having a partner like you guys, where it's you listen, you're patient, and you fundamentally try to get to what the need is, rather than be like, okay, you gave us a list, and we'll just try to match that list, or hey, we have this candidate in the hopper, and we're gonna just force feed this candidate to you. Like I actually have always appreciated you guys in terms of the listening and the patience. So I'm just gonna make a plug for that, because I
Thank you. I
mean, this has
appreciate
been
that.
years, and Sean, I've known you for a while, and I think that's the thing that why I always pick up the call, why I always try to do my best to work with you, because I think that in itself in this industry is really hard, because it's usually a turn and burn to like, hey, we either got candidates or we got openings. How are we going to fill it with you, right? And so it's really a really long term focused mindset that you guys have, I think. And one of the things that I've always appreciated about you, Sean. But to answer your question,
Thank you. Yep.
sorry.
Appreciate it. I appreciate that.
But to answer one of your questions about the biggest challenge, one of the things that I would say, one of the biggest things I've learned was um, my first FDA interaction where I had to lead it. And what I mean by that is, I was either a senior manager or associate director going into this really big, career changing type of activity. And I would say that I always supported or always helped with FDA interactions, never actually got to lead. And and it was very interesting. I got no support or advice about how to lead this meeting. It was basically purely on what I had done before, and I'll be honest, it scared me, and it was one of those things where I really tried to do my best, where I understood the importance of it. I understood the magnitude of what I was about to do, and it was something that I've always been looking forward to do. As a regulatory person, it's super nerdy, but one of the things that you want to do is lead your own FDA meeting. I mean, that's like one of those things where you're like, I checked this. I finally got to do this as a grown up regulatory person, and um, I was working with a team that also didn't have a ton of experience with FDA interaction, and so it went bad. I mean, and here's what I mean. It went so bad that they actually yanked me right before I was about to lead that meeting at FDA because we had some practice ones, and I was really hurt by that. And obviously, it still lingers in my brain because this is like I'm still talking about it as a grown up later. But like this is always had an impact on me, and for two reasons. Why is one, it's really unfair to not properly get your junior regulatory people ready for something that is very important. No advice, no whatever. You're going to basically set them up for failure, and that is one thing that I have taken away from that experience. And then the second thing that I took away from that experience that has always had a lasting impact, and actually that ties in with our previous discussion, is I went in with a preconceived notion of how this meeting should go because I have supported. I saw what it should be. I read up on it, and I was like, "This is how an FDA meeting should go." And if you do practices within a company that is trying to get you ready for an FDA meeting, it doesn't go anything like that. And you know what? FDA meetings in general don't go the way you think it's going to go because it's human beings who are like, "We have questions. You need to answer it. We need to get to some kind of conclusion together, right?" And so I had a very mechanical approach where I was like, "Here's the questions that they're going to ask. Or here's the questions that we ask. Here's the questions I think they're going to ask. You need to like strip out an answer, right?" And so kind of like this, kind of like a podcast where you're like, if we did this really formally, I think it would be a much worse product. But just the fact that we're talking, more conversationally, that's what you need to have with the FDA meeting. And that's ultimately what I took it to another level was in life, things are going to happen. You just need to be prepared and think through how you're going to react. And it's much better. Um, and you're a much more valuable um, um, employee if you could think on your feet and move forward hurdles that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly, you just talked about hurdles, obstacles, and challenges. There's one thing. Well, there's a couple things that are constant, but one thing in our space is change. Change is constant, and so when we talk about the landscape that's ever dynamic, ever evolving, um, and given your experience around cell and gene therapies, Sterling, how share with our audience, how do you really stay ahead of the curve when it comes to regulatory trends? What are some things you do to equip yourself with?
I think one of the things that's probably the most important thing is this background activity that you do is this regulatory intelligence piece, right? So whether you're looking at end note or endpoints or you're talking to people like yourselves where you have a pulse on where the industry is going or where it's headed, I would say those are really important and kind of life lessons that you need to apply forward because you know just having a discussion about for instance where the field is going for cell and gene therapy, you can only see your space because it's a narrow range of view. But based on endpoints and based on discussions with people like Darren, yourself, and Sean, you get a sense of where the industry's at and where it's headed. And so, you know, there's been kind of a huge ramp up for cell and gene therapy, and then there's been this kind of die off, like natural cycle progression, right, of what's going on. And in terms of how much um, commitment or how much development's going on, there's been this like and our industry goes through it every like 5 to 10 years, is like this crystallization moment where they're like, okay, turn them in if you have them, fold them if you don't. And I think that's kind of where our industry is at right now. I mean, it's definitely cyclical, but like um, one of the biggest things I've heard is, and there's memes about this that you guys have seen too, where it's like, before it was the well-fed child, and now it's like move away because it's just obesity and neuroscience that is getting funded, right? And so you think about that, and then you think about how does it apply to cell and gene therapy specifically, and how does it apply to regulatory, right? And so I think um, how I imagine where we're at in terms of cell and gene therapy is CAR Ts, amazingly described. It's been like kind of the focus, and that's the thing that everybody does, or mRNA with the vaccines. But when we say cell and gene therapy, there's a lot that we're still trying to figure out, right? With the recent approval with the CRISPR drug, um, we're getting there. But I would say that the reason that excites me and the reason why I'm in cell and gene therapy right now is because it's still nascent. There's still a lot that we're learning, and the cell types. What I've learned is the cell types really have an impact about how you develop the drug. And I know I'm not doing a great job of answering your question, Darren, but in terms of how do I get ahead, it's I think it's more common sense approach. Does all of these regulations or do these new ideas really apply to what we're doing, and how do we make it make sense scientifically and logically? And that's always been the gold standard that I go against, because if it doesn't make sense, then why are we doing it? Because ultimately somebody at FDA is going to ask the same question. It's like, guys, what are you doing with this? How does this make sense? And then I would say the second part of it too is just, do you have enough experience to say, hey, this random thing might apply to our situation. Can we apply that? And it's kind of like being in legal, right? There's some constitutional statute or some case that's like set precedent that you could pull in to say, does this apply? Can we follow the same? Because there's a lot that we're creating, but there's also things that we're following the framework for, right? I mean, we have evolved from like really, small molecules and vaccines to biologics to cell and gene therapy to, you know, this whole AI design, sophistication. It is, I think, constantly evolving. But ultimately, the question I ask myself is, how does it apply and is it applicable?
Yeah, that's good. I just want to have a quick comment. I really appreciate your approach, your perspective, um, and I would even say strategy to that. Sterling, we work with so many pioneers and innovators, and the ones that I feel truly have their finger on the pulse really utilize and employ an adage, and that's, it takes a village.
Yeah.
And we can have our blinders on. We can have a very myopic perspective on our way is the right way. But when you're able to tap into your network, when you're able to leverage people that perhaps have gone before you and have hit a wall and shared those challenges, obstacles, and even, roadblocks that they've had, I think that's important when you're able to really reach out. And the other adage, when we've seen even drugs get approved and go commercial, is, your network can be tied to your net worth. So it's important that you utilize your network in all aspects. We've had really the pleasure of supporting companies that have gotten approvals, and certainly gotten approved as well. But and that's been the golden thread through it all. It takes a village and utilizing your network.
And that's so true. Darren, if there's a true adage, it's that. And and it shows up in a lot of different places, right? So like I still chat with former colleagues where we're like, hey, we ran into this hurdle. I ran into this hurdle. Thoughts on this? How do I bring best product forward, right? Or even just this whole like getting hired process, right? So like Aurion Biotech, I was first introduced to them like a year before I joined, and I went through the hiring process. Ultimately, I wasn't selected, but you know, just because you didn't get selected the first time doesn't mean that the company or the product is bad. And so, when they reached out again and said, "Hey, it hasn't been working with the previous person. Can we bring you in?" It was one of those things where you're just like, "Wow!" Like, I'm glad I still stayed with that network of people and stayed in touch because it's an amazing drug, and I wanted to work on it no matter what. Like, whether they asked me a year later or 2 years later, this is a drug that I did want to work on, and
Yeah.
I still enjoy working on. So yeah, to your point, that your network is probably really key to the day to day overcoming of hurdles or having other thought process. But ultimately, it's how far you go too, right?
What I love what you talked about, Sterling, with the humility piece, right? Of being able to, tap into former colleagues and, hey, I don't have all the answers, but ultimately, you're centered around, I want what's best for the patient. We want to be able to drive this forward, and so you're humble enough to ask anyone for help, who may be able to give that guidance and those things. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. We got two questions left, and I want to make sure we get through both of these because I think they're going to be really helpful for the audience. um, you know, we talked a lot about innovation. We talked a lot about, being innovative and being kind of on the forefront. I know, Sterling, you're constantly, evaluating, as you mentioned, where are we going? What's the future? What are we thinking through? Whether it's AI, whether it's all these different things, it seems like every 6 months there's like a new shiny, keyword or topic or something that it's like, ooh, let me chase that shiny object syndrome for a minute. But especially with the accelerated pace of all this innovation and areas like cell and gene therapy, where we see, to your point, it's kind of that cyclical, but I think we're coming back around again with some excitement around different innovations and breakthroughs. How do you see your role of being a regulatory leader evolving with innovation to not just be gatekeepers or guiders or, hey, this is the best way to do it forward so we can get there, but really being strategic drivers of development moving forward? How do you see that ecosystem evolving?
Yeah, I would say that for those regulatory people who are in more nascent spaces or in the forefront of things, um, it's really you are you're trying your best not to slow things down, and I think that is what everybody's trying to do, right? It's how can I not slow things down and move this program along because you can truly see benefit from the clinical results, right? What you're working on, or you have a really innovative idea that you want to get into clinic, and so it really depends on the stage too, right? So if you got an innovative concept that you want to take into clinic, there's a lot of ways to take it faster into clinic, right? And so whether it be with the less regulatory burden in places like Australia, or you have everything that you need lined up to go into the U.S., where you're not doing a billion, sorry, like more than 10 non-clinical studies. Like you can hit US really hard if you're super focused and you know what you're doing, and you think maybe 2 to 3 years out from what you're doing, that you only need to do maybe one or two animal tox studies. And even now that's changing, right? So this whole organoid that earlier we were talking about, Sean, approach for safety, like how does that apply? How can you make it apply? Because there's some things that you just can't, you know, so here's the thing: like, if everything was cookie cutter, I wouldn't have a job. You just be like, okay, hey, the manual says AB1. This is what you need to follow. But I think where we get paid as regulatory individuals is to say, hey, I know there's a regulation around this, but maybe we could try something different based on where the political winds are changing and where the industry is going. These concepts are changing, right? So, like, I mean, for instance, before it was always, hey, two pivotal studies are necessary when you're in phase three. You need to do that. It's changed. Like I heard Caliph last year December say it's 60% now studies that are just a single pivotal study, and that's mind blowing, right? Because that's like millions of dollars a year or years of time shaving off, and you don't have to do it, but it ultimately comes to, Sean, the innovation comes from the applicability of what the framework has and how it applies to you. And then I would say the second thing is just testing the waters, right? Like, hey, I've never done this before, but be humble enough to say I've never done it before, but let's try it out. Let's figure it out, or bring in somebody who says, hey, I've done this before. Here's a few things that you need to watch out for.
Yeah, that's great.
We'll close with this question, Sterling. Given your comprehensive and vast experience in working with pioneers, leaders, I'm sure exceptional leaders, um, what is something that you wish early stage biotech founders or CEOs, Sterling, understood about regulatory affairs that could help them succeed faster?
I think I have two ideas for CEOs or leaders in how to or what to look for in regulatory people, right? So, do you know what you want for your business, right? So, somebody who is CEO of um, Roche has a different idea of who they want as their top regulatory person versus a CEO company that came out of either a venture firm or academia, because those two things are actually very different in themselves in emerging or small biotechs. And so, as a CEO, what is it that you want for your business from a regulatory standpoint? And then I would say the second thing is um, you should really understand how flexible and driven that person is to the ideas that you have, because you don't want a partner who is not aligned with where you want to go. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of regulatory people who either A, mail it in, or B, like want to be litigators on behalf of FDA. And those are each has their own role, but like and I'm thinking more of a small emerging biotech mindset, but it's what I think I get paid to do and that I like doing every day is saying, we have this program, the program is here at this date. How do we drive it forward? How do we make sure that we are giving the best product to patients and people will benefit from it? And for us, it's to basically restore sight. And like, you know, what greater mission can you have than to help people restore sight? And so, um, and I think that falls into basically back to what the advice, the first piece of advice is like, what is your company about? Is it really mission driven? And what is it that you want to do with your company? And then two, it's like, you want a partner who's going to have that same vision with you and share it and try to push it along, rather than somebody who's going to, there's a lot of people who try to slow it down and say like, hey, I'm the smartest person. I know all the regulations and we got to take all these things off that might or might not apply.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. There's been there are companies out there, Sterling, that really don't have a clear vision. In other words, they aim for nothing and hit it with 100% accuracy. You know, have it going in many different directions. And so when we're engaged on high level searches, which we're fortunate to have happen often, that's our leading question. What's your vision? What's your goal for the company? Because we can't appropriately or adequately represent you and attract the innovators, the leaders, the pioneers that you're seeking to really move your programs and assets forward unless that vision is clear. So
Yeah.
that's really good advice. Well, Sterling, I know I could speak on behalf of Sean and our
Yeah.
audience that this has been absolutely engaging, fun, and certainly informative. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your best practices and your perspectives. So we've truly enjoyed our time together. And to our audience out there, we're looking forward to seeing you all on the next episode. We only can thoroughly thrive if we continue to work as one and win as one. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today for another great episode of Thoroughly Thriving. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to share it with those in your world. If you'd like to learn more about the Thorough Group, please go to thoroughgroup.com. And remember that we will all remain thoroughly thriving if we continue to work as one and win as one.